Blackburn.
My name is Kirby Crosby. My name is Stevie Howard.
My name is Ashton Taylor, and our topic is stem cell research.
We are now open for questions.
What is stem cell research?
So, stem cell research itself is kind of hard to define, but stem cells are cells that have the potential to develop into a lot of different kind of cells in your body, depending on whether they're multipotent or pluripotent. And they're able to replenish damaged cells and do different things like that. There's two different main kinds of stem cell research, which is embryonic and adult. So there's like separate definitions for those.
Ashton, what's the difference between embryonic and adult stem cells?
Embryonic stem cells come from embryos that can be given up from in vitro fertilization or from taking them from the umbilical cord after birth of a child. And adult stem cells are taken from adult humans or other animals and species. And usually adult stem cells are used for things like diseases and helping people health-wise, while embryonic stem cells are usually used to fertilize people or give birth or that kind of thing.
Also, embryonic stem cells, they're unspecialized, which means they don't have any tissue-specific structures. So as embryonic stem cells, they can be specialized to do many different things, like whether it be like a brain cell or heart cell. So they're used for pretty much anything. In adult cells, they're usually specialized from where you take them out of. Like if you took them out of bone marrow, then you're probably going to use that for like reconstruction of a bone, or like out of a heart, then you're probably going to use it for something in the heart because they are specialized.
But aren't there adult pluripotent cells that we have the technology now to induce pluripotent cells in adults?
Yes, those are the induced pluripotent
Exactly.
cells. So those are somatic cells, you're correct. And there's an introduction of a set of 4 factors into the somatic cells, along with specific culture conditions and alters to each cell's epigenetic signature, which also resets the cell to a pluripotent embryonic stem cell state. So that is possible with the
And so
technology.
that would be a way to obtain a pluripotent cell without using from an embryo. Is that correct?
Correct, but it's not completely guaranteed that it's going to work as well as the embryonic stem cells are.
Okay, so there's research that suggests that they're not as good as embryonic cells? Okay.
Sounds kind of dangerous to me. Are there any like dangers involved with pulling stem cells out of like an adult or a child?
Yes. For the dangers with stem cell research besides, there has been signs where with Parkinson's disease where they've tried to like insert adult cells into the patient's body, and there's been side effects such as like tremoring, heart attacks, panic attacks, just passing out, and also it like hasn't proven to work as well and could have caused worse things with, especially with Parkinson's was the example that I looked at.
You said not work as well as?
Other like medical needs or just like not leaving them alone.
Okay,
Like, letting them
so
be.
not as well as like other stem cell treatments, but as
Yes.
other treatments in general?
Yes.
Okay.
Also, there's the risk for like just like a organ transplant. Your immune system can reject whatever stem cells you receive, and they can also form tumors in your body.
So do stem cell recipients then have to take some anti-rejection drugs?
They-
And would that be a regimen they would have to continue for the rest of their lives?
What's the controversy, Sydney?
The controversy comes from the embryonic stem cell research because to be able to harvest embryonic stem cells, you have to destroy the embryo. So they kind of link it with abortion.
Mm-hmm.
Is that true that you have to destroy the embryo? Okay.
So what about the umbilical? I had to, I've got one daughter we went through this with, and so this was roughly 10 years ago, and we had to sign, basically it says we could harvest the embryonic blood, something, I forget, it's 10 years ago, something along those lines. What about those cells? Are those just as effective, less effective?
They call those like fetal stem cells,
Okay.
so they're not quite embryonic stem cells because they have become more developed, but they're not yet to the degree of adult stem cells. So they're
Right.
easier to induce into the embryonic state.
Mm-hmm.
So they're kind of like in between.
So it's somewhere in between. Okay.
Embryonic stem cells only exist within the first 14 days of.
Very good.
So they're called like
Human
pre-embryos. So
Yeah.
you're harvesting them from pre-embryos, but
Okay. So what's the process? How does this work? And
Like the in vitro fertilization?
no, the what do I do with this? If I've got cells? What am I doing with them in order to try and make them into something else? That's the purpose of a stem cell, right?
For embryonic stem cells, they're implanted like into a woman or since they're used for fertilization, they're given to a human,
Mhm.
while the somatic stem cells are put into a petri dish and are fertilized that way.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I guess I'm a little confused. You're talking about stem cells being used for fertilization. I mean,
Yeah, I was going to follow up with that too,
Okay.
because if you take an embryonic stem cell and put it into a woman, then aren't you fertilizing? I mean, not fertilizing. You're implanting the cell at that point.
They're used for like cloning and kind of choosing what you want, making sure like the kind of child you have doesn't have like certain genetic capabilities that you would want.
All right, so you're talking about the reproductive side of it. I'm talking about the research side of it. So if we've got these embryonic stem cells, what am I doing with them to make them functional, helpful to research?
so you harvest embryonic stem cells and they put them in petri dishes and they form these like stem cell lines almost. And so some of the research that they do is to see how the formation of a child happens,
Mhm.
because you don't get to watch that while watching a woman who's pregnant.
Sure.
So they take those stem cells and they let them divide, and you can harvest. They have testing they can do. So if a woman has in vitro fertilization done and she has so many frozen embryos in a freezer somewhere, they can do tests on those, and let's say one has the genetic factors for Parkinson's disease. So they could take that embryo, harvest the stem cells, and then let it grow and continue to divide, and it has all the factors for Parkinson's disease, so they can use that to test different drugs, test different gene therapies to see if anything will work to help with the symptoms of Parkinson's.
So what is the problem with that? Kirby,
back there.
what's the problem with that process?
Of putting the embryos in petri
Yeah,
dishes.
yeah.
And, ethically, I think it depends on your worldview what you think the problem is
Fair
with
enough.
it.
Okay.
My worldview is they literally peel the trophoblast or skin of the embryo like an orange, and then they discharge the contents into a petri dish. And as someone that I value human life, I just disagree with it entirely, because it feels like an abuse of someone that's living, because life begins at
Fertilization.
conception. Yeah, that was the word I was looking for. So
does everyone agree with that?
I would have to say not everyone agrees with that, because people are still getting
I think
abortion.
she's asking the panel, right?
Yeah, just in general, does everyone agree that life begins when the egg and the sperm come together?
Personally, or as
Just
as a
in
whole?
general, in your research, have you found
I
that?
would say yes, I do believe that.
I think science proves that life begins at conception, but I mean, we have Roe v. Wade and abortion's legal, so I think it proves that people don't all
Well,
agree.
that means that they're okay with killing a baby, but I'm saying, we're talking about, you're saying embryonic stem cells are harvested at like the first, would you say 4 days? 14 days. So we're basically looking at a mass of cells, okay? Is that life, is my question. Especially if it's been cryogenically frozen for, 6 or 7 years.
I would say yes, and another thing that proves that is the cloning technology, which is when you create a ladder-born twin from a single cell of someone by transplanting the DNA into the adult cell. So yeah, I would say it does, and I think the cloning proves that.
So cloning's a whole other issue that we're, whether or not we should be cloning people. I believe that most countries right now have legislation in place to ban human cloning.
Right.
So how does that impact stem cell research?
Well, cloning starts with the stem cells.
Okay, so, and if most states have banned cloning humans, again, how then are we able to continue
working with stem cells?
Well,
as for like the state of stem cell research according to like law in the U.S. government, it says that in 2001, President Bush said that federal funds would not be used for stem cell research, embryonic stem cell research, because he believed it was a destruction of embryos. But under the President Obama's administration, more laws have been passed through Congress, and they've kept trying to find loopholes within like the 1995 Health and Human Services Bill, which allowed them to test more on adult stem cells. So I think it's just kind of like they are not looking at it as the same thing, but almost separate things right now. If that makes sense.
And the thing that was a problem in Bush presidency, as he did, like he prohibited federal funds to be able to, like research it and stuff. There weren't any laws that affected the pre-embryos, in which that is what is used for the stem cell research. So that didn't prohibit any of the private or individual research films or stuff like that. So they could still do whatever on their own.
Well, private companies could, because the government can only restrict, where government funds go. And I think he did allow stem cell research for us. There were 4 lines that were already in process. Research was already going on, and he didn't stop the research on those lines. He just says no more to that. Okay, so we've got this debate about whether we should be using stem cell research from an ethical position or a moral position. Should we be destroying embryos to do this? What's the upside? What's the benefit?
It can. Okay. Well, it can cure a lot of diseases, such as like Parkinson's disease and heart's diseases, and it's also been found, or they kind of have like a promise that this new regeneration of medicine can be able to cure some cancers.
Okay, has it actually cured Parkinson's disease?
I'm not sure.
No.
Okay, I thought you had said they had cured Parkinson's disease.
Well, I know that they have been like researching on means to do that.
Definitely, they're developing therapies for those with Parkinson's. But so, do you know exactly how many illnesses or therapies have resulted from the use of stem cell research?
There has actually been discovery of like tumors that have occurred because of stem cell research.
Okay, so that's the bad side of it.
But
Okay.
positive from stem cell research that they've done recently is with skin and in bone marrow. And skin is what they've learned. They've been testing. You lose up to 40,000 skin cells a day on like the top layer of your skin, and it has to continue to replace like throughout. And they've discovered that when the cells duplicate and are moving forward, that those certain cells like within the skin are able to cure have been able to cure skin diseases and certain like bone and blood diseases within the arm. If that makes sense.
So the research you found, has that made a distinction between whether those were embryonic stem cells or adult stem cells?
They were adult stem cells.
Yes. Okay.
Mhm.
So if
the,
I'm sorry.
on the embryonic side, is it fair to say that the research is still ongoing because of a promise of potential future, but not really because of any results right now of anything solid that's been any solid research that's been completed? It's still ongoing. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it's all still ongoing.
Okay. So I want to go back. Maybe I took her question, but on the example of the skin, which I think is a great example, but that's a somatic cell. That's that's a cell that you can harvest that really pretty easily, relatively easily, as long as you can differentiate it out between something else. So did you find where the majority of this research is going on? Is it with adult or is it with embryonic?
I'm not sure as of currently which is more, but I know that adult stem cell research was founded before the embryonic stem cell research was, because embryonic they found out a way to grow them in the lab in 1998, and so that's when they started doing more stuff with them. So they've done more in the past with adult stem cells, but I'm not sure of currently.
Well, let's face it, it's not as controversial. I mean, you can harvest bone marrow and separate out the stem cells, and it's not an easy process, but it's not taking a potential embryo, something that can grow into a human life, so it's a lot easier to do that. So would it be fair to say from your research that that's more supported than the embryonic? That adult stem cells is less of a controversy, let's put it that way.
Personally, I'd say yeah.
Mhm.
Especially from a Christian viewpoint.
Mhm.
I mean, I would say I think like we should do away with embryonic stem cell research and invest more into adult stem cell research, because with technology today there are so many like possibilities, and also like I don't think humans feel comfortable with like letting their taxes go towards research on like embryos rather than when they can go to adult stem cell research too,
Yeah.
which I think would be a major positive.
But somebody's arguing the other side of that.
Mm-hmm.
Who's doing that? Who's arguing the other side and why?
The science communities, yeah. Because, I mean, I think embryonic stem cells have been found to be they have more potential for drug developments and gene therapies and stuff like that
Sure.
than adult stem cells.
So, are there any kinds of laws in place for how the researchers acquire stem cells? Like, what's the process with that? I mean, if you're in the hospital, are they just going to be like, "Hey, you're here anyway. We're going to take your stem cells"?
Embryonic?
Any of them?
I know for embryonic stem cells, most of it all comes through in vitro fertilization. And so whenever that happens, they take 10 to 30 eggs out of a mother, and then they fertilize those with sperm. And they have like as many as they can to make sure they at least get one living one, because that's usually, it usually happens whenever a mother is infertile and has a lot of trouble getting pregnant and stuff like that. And so then they they see how many will live, and then they put only up to 3 inside of the mother. And so I think the problem with doing away with embryonic stem cell research is that there's so many extra fertilized embryonic cells that just sit around for eternity.
Would they just freeze those?
They just freeze those.
So would the mother have to sign consent though? Because
Yes.
I mean, technically they're her children, and so
Right.
she's saying, well, if I'm only having these 3, okay.
Yes, they have to sign consent, and then the National Institutes of like Health, like the FDA, like had to approve the trials in the U.S. to like for people to be able to donate their eggs, if that makes sense. So they have to consent, and then they also have to get physician approval to donate their eggs.
Okay.
And why would you need physician approval to donate your eggs?
I think because there's risk within like maybe the procedure, just like any other procedure like you're going to have. So like a doctor would obviously have to like talk
Well,
to
I
you
guess I
about-
was curious. I thought the eggs were just sitting in the freezer.
Had already been harvested.
You can donate them too.
So this is something that's happening in the U.S. Have you found that it's happening other places?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you've got it?
There's different regulations in all the different countries, like as far as guidelines. For example, Japan allows scientists to conduct stem cell research, but only for therapeutic purposes.
Only for what?
Therapeutic purposes. So,
So hang on. What would be a non-therapeutic?
fertilization as opposed to health related.
So say that again. Okay. So
Or cloning.
okay. So you said that was for embryonic.
That's just for everything as far as Japan is concerned.
Okay.
Singapore is widely considered Asia's stem cell like research center. It has more than 40 stem cell research groups in the country, and authorizes the use for therapeutic purposes of embryos that are no more than 2 weeks old. So the 14.
Overall, most all of the countries in Asia don't have very restrictive stem cell rules. Like they're all pretty much allowed to do whatever. But the UK, Switzerland, and Australia, Australia bans all human cloning and for reproduction and research, and so they don't have anything to do with stem cells. And the United Kingdom does not permit the destruction of embryos for human embryonic stem cell research, and then the Swiss Parliament doesn't allow that either.
And Mexico